Great, lovely. So hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you might be, from a very cold London. My name's Millie. Some of you may know me already. I'm the Technical Partnerships Advisor for Start Network's Crisis Anticipation and Risk Financing team. And I just want to say a big thank you to everyone for joining us today, and welcome to the first Global FOREWARN meeting of 2024. Hopefully you already know that we'll be focusing on anticipating drought. And as always, it's great to see so many people joining us. As usual, we're really hoping that this meeting will be as interactive as possible. We've done our best to leave as much time as we can for some questions and answers. So please do introduce yourself in the chat and make sure to say hello and post any questions and comments as we go. We'll try and collect them throughout the call, and then at the end we'll have an open session as well for discussion. Before we jump into the content for today, I'd just like to flag that there will be presentations in both English and French today. So to make sure that you're able to make the most of today's content, please do make sure you're in the correct channel for the language you'd like to listen in. So as usual, we have English to French. We also have interpretation from English into Spanish today. So there should be 2 channels available to choose from down at the bottom. And you can do this by selecting interpretation in the panel below, and then choosing the language you'd prefer to hear. So as you can see on the screen, you'll hear both the original audio and the interpretation where that's relevant. If you prefer not to hear the original in the background, you can also mute the original audio. If you are listening in English, please do select the English channel now. That way, later in the call, when we hear from Francophone colleagues, you will be able to hear automatically. So jumping straight in then, we'll start very soon with some opening remarks from our very own Nelly Mande, who is our East and Southern Africa Regional Advisor and will be joining us from Zimbabwe. But before I hand you over, I'm just going to run through the order of the day. So first off, we'll hear about the way that Start Network's 2 financing mechanisms, Start Fund and Start Ready, have been used to access financing in anticipation of drought. And we're then very lucky to have Dr. Bongo joining us from FAO, who will talk through the drought trigger model landscape of Zimbabwe, looking at coordination and collaboration between different actors in the country, and also the different models that are available for drought in Zimbabwe. After that, we'll move across to Madagascar, where we'll hear from Mamra Solofo, our colleague at WHH Madagascar, who will explain the model that's used by Start Network members in the Start Ready risk pool. And then finally, we'll hear from Francisco Osuna, who's joining us today from HelpAge Colombia, who accessed the Analysis for Action grant to support Start Fund Alert 733 for anticipating drought in Colombia, and subsequently implemented the project. So hopefully there's something for everybody in that lineup. There's plenty to get through today. So as I said before, we're hoping there'll be lots of time for question and discussion, and please do add your comments and questions as we go. And I'll hand over now to Nelly. So Nelly Mande, as I said, Start Network's Regional Advisor for East and Southern Africa, who will be opening the meeting for us with some reflections on the possibilities for anticipating drought. Nelly, over to you. Oh, Nelly, are you with us?
Your microphone. Okay. Okay, yeah. Millie, can you hear me now?
Yes, we've got you loud and clear. Off you go.
All right, thank you. Okay, so I just want to say good afternoon. Where I am is afternoon. Good morning for those of you who are in other regions where it's still maybe morning. And good evening for those who are in the regions where it's going towards evening. Myself, I'm based in Southern Africa, Zimbabwe. I am the regional advisor covering East and Southern Africa. I just want to start by saying we are very pleased to welcome you again to our first FOREWARN meeting in 2024, which is focusing on anticipating drought. Thank you all for your ongoing support. Thank you all for your ongoing commitment, participation, and for lending your expertise on this forum. For some of you, it's been for many years. As Millie has already mentioned, in this quarterly meeting, we have an excellent lineup of presenters on topics that are relating to anticipating drought, as well as facilitating timely actions. So to open the meeting, I just wanted to highlight experiences, challenges and opportunities that we as START Network, we keep facing around anticipating the impact of drought in the region that I cover. I will just focus on examples in the region that I cover within East and Southern Africa. And I will try to use some snippets from South Sudan, Somalia, and Zimbabwe. But I also want to highlight that despite the challenges that we're facing as we work with different communities in different contexts, we are aware that lots of opportunities exist for us to be able to better manage drought, both through the START Network financing mechanisms for anticipatory and early action, as well as just the broader sector, the different initiatives from different actors. So if I'm just to look at snippets from South Sudan, starting with South Sudan, just some experiences from South Sudan that speaks to the topic of today. As you are aware, START Network will talk about the different funding instruments. But around February 2022, I'm just giving the South Sudan example, disputes between cattle herders and farmers in a county of Eastern Equatorial State of South Sudan called Mangwi resulted in a conflict between farmers and herders, so pastoralists and agro-pastoralists. So in the skirmishes, one incident led to mass burning down of houses, loss of property, and injuries, prompting mass displacements. Local communities in the affected areas have long complained about harassment, intimidation, and killing by the herders, who are often armed and graze large herds of cattle, numbering in the thousands, in the gardens of those who are agro-pastoralists. So they'll bring their cattle to graze in the gardens, in the farmlands of the farmers, when pastures become limited. So this is a common occurrence in that county. And START Network, the members in South Sudan raised an alert, and START Network activated it, and we responded to the immediate needs of the displaced populations in that county in South Sudan. The question I want to pose is that, could this have been anticipated, given that is the result of the impact of drought and what that does in terms of the pastoralists, how desperate they get? My answer on my side is that yes, of course, because this happens a lot in the dry season there, which means that there is a window there to act early, to act in anticipation of the drought or the drought spell and the resultant movement that happen, causing clashes. And we see then what we're calling conflict-related displacements, but it is really the interface of climate, conflict, and the resultant displacement that we are seeing at play in South Sudan. I will move on to Somalia. We are in Somalia as well. At the end of the 2022 dry season, which is basically the season that runs from October to January, unprecedented 5th consecutive failed rain season, and a predicted reduction in humanitarian assistance from April 2023 meant that an estimated 80+ million people would face acute food insecurity by mid-year in 2023. While considerable international effort by several actors, including ourselves, helped to avert the famine that could have happened, people remained desperately in need. And we saw like close to 8 million still needing assistance in terms of maybe food assistance and other related needs, with most having actually desperately abandoned their usual dwellings and moving into IDP camps. So the responses, they alleviated unbearable suffering for such households that had really moved, but could more have been done much earlier. We did not need to wait for these communities to abandon their usual dwellings, to resort to abandoning their homes, their assets, their land, and go into a makeshift camp. And then we start to support them there. Something could have been done earlier before the headlines that we saw at the end of at the beginning of 2023 and end of 2022. It was all about appalling situations. Again, I'll come back to say we could have actually done something early, particularly where someone is literally abandoning their usual dwelling, going into a makeshift camp, and where they face other challenges. They are flooding that we've seen over the entire 2023, conflict again in those same camps. Could we have done something such that they don't get desperate and have to travel kilometers on foot to look for help, or they face starvation? I want to end with Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, a country prone to severe drought in some years, and we're happy to say some of the years are basically moderate to low drought in most parts of the country. In such a context, can more be done within the evolution of a season, for instance, so that the at-risk communities can act early, and we end with less people having to or needing assistance? We are seeing how the global need for humanitarian assistance is rising. What that means when even stable contexts have to then compete for those limited needs. You will hear more about the interagency efforts for anticipatory actions from Dr. Bongo. He will speak later. And START Network, from this year as well, we are also working to integrate anticipatory actions in the next season in some of the districts, really looking at joining forces with several other actors in country to scale anticipatory actions for drought. Okay, using, for example, in our case, our START ready mechanisms or funding instruments at global level. Today, the presenters will share some of the ways that this is already happening to highlight ongoing experiences, challenges, and opportunities we need to continue exploring and advocate for the scaling up of anticipatory and early actions. START Network remains committed to the scale up through its START Fund, which also has an anticipatory component. We also remain committed through our START Ready for anticipatory and early actions, as well as the Africa Risk Capacity Replica, an initiative where we partner with the African Union member states, along with the UNWFP and UNHCR, to help African government improve their capacities to better plan, prepare, and respond to extreme weather and natural disasters, to extreme weather events and natural disasters. As I conclude, I want to thank you all for your ongoing commitment and voluntary support through FOREWARN and beyond, as you continue to reaffirm the critical role of anticipatory actions. Anticipating drought is key, not only for minimizing suffering and loss of productive assets, it is key to households and communities' stability and protecting development gains and ultimately the economies of the at-risk countries. Some progress has been achieved to date in advancing anticipatory action, but more can still be done in the at-risk communities through integrating anticipatory actions, and not just ending there, but creating linkages of humanitarian and development efforts. For example, creating linkages of anticipatory actions to early response, to resilience building and long-term development efforts that are already happening in the context that we work through various other actors. This is the only way we can effectively respond to the worsening climate change. I want to end by saying today, we saw headlines, okay? News headlines telling us that the world is experiencing the first 12 months above the 1.50 degrees Celsius that we are all aware of in terms of the warming levels. It's now gone to 1.52. I'll leave you on that note. Thank you very much, and we look forward to a very fruitful afternoon. Thank you.
Nelly, thank you so much for setting the scene for today's conversation with such insights that bring us back to the importance of all the work that our speakers and everyone in this community is doing. Thank you very much. I'll be handing over next to Emma Kazu, who is the meal advisor for the Crisis Anticipation and Risk Financing team here at START Network, who's hopefully going to speak a little bit about some of the work that has been done so far to help us get to a point where we're avoiding the outcomes that you just spoke about, Nelly. So thank you very much. And Emma, handing over to you. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nelly. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you all see my screen?
It's not in presenter mode, but we can see it.
Okay, let me try to put this in presenting mode. Okay. Great, I have the Zoom stuff. Okay, I will try to put it. Oh, fine, sorry. Okay, thank you everyone. As we said, I'm the Crisis Anticipation and Risk Finance Middle Advisor, working within Start Ready, but as well within Start Fund Anticipatory Action type of middle activities. So today I will just be presenting anticipation of drought and the key analysis and the key statistics that we have from the drought project in anticipation within Start Fund and Start Ready. I think later on we'll have a lot of speakers going more into details around the project, the lesson learned and the challenges. So today I will just focus on globally what we've done in this aspect. So we'll start with Start Fund. So regarding anticipation of drought within Start Fund, we have 51 alerts since 2014, sorry. And with more anticipatory alerts that were raised, for 27% of the alert raised for drought were anticipatory, which is the second highest raise for anticipatory alerts after flooding. So it still remains something we work a lot, and one of the main focus of anticipations that we are doing within Start Fund. So in terms of anticipation, we have almost £3 million that were disbursed for a total reach of 300,000 people reach, and in response it's almost a double with almost 5 million pounds that were disbursed and for almost 500,000 people reach. As you can see here, the main difference is the activation rate. So for anticipation, almost like 80% of the alerts that was raised were activated and projects were implemented. For response, however, we only have a 41% activation rate. So I will just go into details of why we have this difference, and also maybe you can understand how anticipation can be actually a good answer for drought projects. So on top of timeliness that Nelly mentioned and how we can act earlier to save lives, also in terms from a strategic point of view, it can be very interesting to do anticipation. So most of the reason why we have a low rate for Start Fund response compared to anticipation in the decision-making process were that usually alerts were not aligning with the Start Fund niche. So the Start Fund niche is under the radar crisis, small to medium crisis, and you have to identify a spike in an ongoing crisis. So for drought, for example, most of the response projects were too large, and the fact that Start Fund usually amount of money is a bit lower than other donors, which means we'll have a low coverage rate for Start Fund interventions. And in some cases, it can escalate to tensions within the community. So it seems that usually response project was too small compared to large crisis that was ongoing in crisis. Another aspect is a slow onset crisis. So drought is a very slow onset crisis. We don't have, it's not like cyclone or flooding, which can happen in a very short period of time. It can last for like 6-7 months. And in some cases, it was hard to see how it was a spiked and ongoing crisis. And it was a reason that a lot of alerts were not activated because it was too long and too big for it to be a Start Fund response. Another aspect was the geographic areas that were covered with more relevant to decision makers, or sometimes the lack of comprehensive crisis information provided in the alert notes. So these two topics can also be applied for anticipatory alerts, and the reason why some anticipatory alerts were not activated were also due to this reason, which is the most common reason not to activate crisis. And finally, the last point is around timeliness. So in a lot of time, decision maker thought it was way too late to raise the alert, and that the situation was already too bad and too in depth to raise the alert, and it would have been preferable to act earlier, which is bringing me to the topic of like anticipation and why usually anticipation for drought was well received by the decision maker, because it was before the spike of the crisis, and usually the crisis will not have unfold to be too large. So start fund intervention is actually better in a way that it will allow and avoid of a big crisis to fold, which in some cases was explaining the reason why we have a higher rate for anticipation that we have for response. So this was a bit the difference between anticipation and response in decision making, and how you can see that anticipation actually for start funds for drought can actually make a lot of sense. So I will just go back a bit on the trends on the alert rate. So as you can see, there was a lot of alert rates in 2016. So the main reason it was the El Nino year. So there was a lot of response alerts that were raised at this time. So just to let you know, 2016 anticipation was only starting at start fund, which can be explaining why we have such a difference between anticipation and response. But overall, we had a lot of response alert being raised this year. And overall now it's kind of merging, and we have almost the same number of anticipation and response alerts being raised every year, which on average, as we can see, it's around 2-3 per year. And in terms of the region, most of the alerts were raised in Eastern Africa or Southern Eastern Asia or Southern Asia. So we've done some comparative analysis, and I was trying to determine what was the main difference between response project and anticipation project in terms of activities, of lead time, of cost per beneficiary, and what was the main difference between all the projects that we had. So I think over time we have more than 70 projects related to anticipation, to drought in general, so anticipation and response projects included. And so what we've seen from this data is, in terms of project profile, is anticipation projects tend to be more multidisciplinary. So we have more sectors involved, and there's way more collaboration across different sectors, and this multi-sectoral approach allowed to have anticipate crisis in a very effective way. In a contrary, response projects tend to be maybe more large-scale projects with a broader reach, and they will tend to focus on one type of sector. Of course, for response projects, the sectors they tend to focus more on is food security and livelihood. While for anticipation, we also have a lot of other activities such as WHH, health, and these kind of things that will be included in the project. In terms of other things that are related to activities, cash distribution is also very dominant in both anticipation and response, with 40% almost in both of projects that included cash distribution. Then in terms of the lead time analysis, of course, anticipation is way more timely. So it provided 2 days after the peak of the crisis, while response is usually 64 days after the peak of the crisis. So what we consider lead time in here is the difference between the peak of the crisis and when the targeted population was reached. So that's why for anticipation, it's even 2 days after the peak of the crisis, because it doesn't include all of the preparation activities. Also, just to take some cautions and limitation of this, is like crisis peak can differ across different countries and contexts. So in some cases, it would be when the rainfall like just lower down, it would be identified as a peak of the crisis, while in some cases the peak of the crisis will be before the lean season and before the harvesting season, and when we suspect food insecurities. So just be also cautious that timeliness and peak of the crisis and all of these aspects, spike of the crisis, can differ according to countries, according to context, and not everyone has the same definition, but which makes as well the project very interesting and very different from one another. Which also brings me to the last analysis, which I tried to identify if there was a difference in the cost per beneficiary between anticipation and response project, because usually we will tend to think that anticipation, as we acted earlier, the market is not the same and will save some costs. But from this analysis we've done on the project that we have, we didn't see any significant difference. So it doesn't mean that acting earlier is not cheaper, but it means that from the data that we have, I couldn't conclude on having this difference. So this is for start funds. So as you can see, there are a lot of different type of projects, different type of interesting learnings that we have. But I think that our start fund will have Francisco, who will present from HelpAge, more insight on how we can implement a start fund project. So hopefully it will answer some questions. So as I said at the beginning, anticipation of drought can be done within start fund, but also within start ready, which is one of the risks we are covering. So as Nelly mentioned earlier, there was some project in Somalia, Senegal, and Zimbabwe for drought. So here I'm just including risk pool 1, but there are also other projects under the DRF that were done in terms of drought before. So as you can see here, the date of the trigger is usually 5 to 6 months before the peak of the crisis. It's because we will trigger at the beginning of the dry season, and the peak of the crisis will usually be considered as when the food insecurity will basically arrive in the country. So that's why you have this difference, and that's where usually you will have the payout. So the Start Ready project are larger than the Start Fund project, and we usually reach more people. So that's why you have way more rich people in Start Ready than in Start Fund. And just to finish, so these 3 models relies on ARC replica policies that we buy on top of the regular project in order to have more reach. And it's all about the Start Network risk layering approach. With Start Ready, we will cover moderate events, and with ARC replica, we are able to reach more people in risk in case of a severe event. And we are using as well the model. So as you can see, the way we act and the way we identify the peak of the crisis is you will have rain spell. So the ARC will estimate the impact, and you will have a payout at the harvest season in order to provide a safety net to the population, which will allow us, compared to like a normal response, to like way earlier, and to allow the population to not have to use negative coping mechanism or other kind of things. I will not go too much into details because I believe it will be explained as well later on by our speaker talking about the Madagascar model. But yes, that's it from me on an overview of what's done in Start Fund and Start Ready.
Fab, thanks so much, Emma. Lots of food for thought there. There is a question in the chat. I don't know if you would mind just taking that one now. Kevin, I don't know if you're able to come off mute if you want to ask your question. Maybe we can pick that one up now.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me. Yeah, I think, when we talk about anticipatory action, one of the reasons we want to promote it, not the only reason, but one of the reasons is that we expect it to cost less in the long run. Obviously, the analysis here is short term. It's looking at just cost per beneficiary in the short term. But I'm wondering if START has done any kind of studies that could potentially calculate the hypothetical cost saved by conducting anticipatory action. I think intuitively it makes sense, but there's a lot of requests, and at least in my space, there's sort of requests for evidence on, does this really work? Does it really save money? I know that's quite hypothetical because we're talking about an unknown, but just curious, really, just a question for consideration. Thank you.
No, thank you. That's a very good question. And I was actually as well surprised because we usually expect anticipatory project to be cheaper, as you can like procurement costs would be cheaper, I guess. So we don't, of course, I've made it with like very global data, and we don't have like that much details on each cost of each thing. So that's why I think it's hard as well to have like a conclusion if it's cheaper or not. I think it's in our plan to do more study because we do have a lot of data, and we would expect to conduct more studies. So now we are trying to collect even more and more data, asking agencies. We have some cases where agency reported that they save costs by acting earlier. there were also some cases where actually it didn't change anything by acting earlier. So it's something we are going to work on, and I know it's part of our plan to conduct maybe an external study on this. But yeah, for Start Fund, it can be a bit tricky because it's only 45 days project, and in projects related to drought, which is like a long, slow onset crisis, I think that's why we usually struggle to find evidence. But yeah, to answer your question, we are planning to do more in-depth study to know about cost per beneficiary analysis.
Thanks, Emma.
Great, thanks so much, Emma. Oh, Luca, yeah, go ahead, and then we'll move on to the next speaker after you, but please go for it. Yeah.
Apologies, everyone. Luca Parodi, I'm the regional specialist for FAO based in West Africa, working on anticipatory action and emergency response. So I think this, I just wanted to intervene on this very quick reflection of the different costs between anticipatory action and response, which I think is very important. I think you can have cost savings on the cost for beneficiary if you have long-term preparedness, long-term agreements. It's the long-term agreements and the long-term preparedness that enables you to find savings in a disaster risk reduction and therefore also when you activate anticipatory action. But it's difficult, I think, both for START, for a lot of us, to find projects that allow us to build these longer-term preparedness before we activate. And therefore, our activations, are done very quickly using similar operational mechanisms as we use for response. So therefore, in the actual cost per beneficiary to deliver the aid that we usually deliver, you're not going to see much difference. I think the attention should be focused on the difference impact of the beneficiaries. A lot of the return on investment evaluations that FAO has published over the course of the years point very much to the fact that if you intervene earlier, the impacts on the beneficiaries are going to be lower. And that's where always I think the advocacy has always been. We know that acting earlier reduces the impact on the beneficiaries across so many sectors, and therefore you're going to have less humanitarian needs later on. I think this is very important to differentiate, and like that's I think where the real gain is. And then if we can work on longer term preparedness, we're going to also have lower cost on the anticipatory action. But anticipatory action reduces the humanitarian impacts. That's where the biggest and also let's talk about dignity, autonomy of the people on the ground, well-being. So I think I think that's where the key focus has always been on our advocacy. Over.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much, Luca. I think, yeah, I'm seeing lots of nodding around. I think definitely agreed. And I would maybe suggest, like, one of the other interesting findings from Emma's presentation there was, the time that it took to actually implement a response or an activity. And, you could see that difference in, it was 64 days for response. It was 2 days for anticipation. So even if it's not ahead of time, and even it's still moving towards that sooner point, which, as you say, it has other impacts, all of which you just mentioned. Luca, I wonder if you would be happy to share some of those studies in the chat for people to kind of have a look through, and we can share them with the notes as well. That would be really helpful. I can see there's some conversation ongoing in the chat as well. But I think for now, we'll be moving on to our next speaker, and we'll come back maybe to this conversation if that's interesting after we've heard from everybody today. We do have some time for that. So next, I'm handing over to Sehen Andrianiana, who is our country manager for Madagascar. And she'll be introducing our next speaker as well. Sehen, over to you.
Thank you so much, Millie. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So we are happy to present you today a model of DROUGHT anticipatory action, which will be presented by our colleague from WHH. That model has been used since 2018 within the FBF program at that time. And Start Network has been the technical and financial partner with WHH. In 2022, the custodianship of the Early Action Protocol was open to other members. And at that time, CRS and WHH were the EAP custodian for the model, I mean. And then in 2023, last year, we have adopted the model within the Start Ready anticipatory action. And now it covers 6 districts in the southern of the country. A lot of learning were done within the model and within the early action protocol. And this week, the model is triggering in one district in the south. So really happy to share that with you today. We are delighted to have Mam Raslouf to share with us the model, the DROUGHT model. Mam is the scientific expert from WHH. Thank you so much, Mam, for accepting to share with us this model. And I'm happy to give you the floor for now. Thank you. So over to you, Mam.
Merci beaucoup, CN, de m'avoir cédé la parole. Comme dit CN, je suis l'expert scientifique et technique au sein de WHH basé à Madagascar. Et je suis très heureux d'être avec vous ici pour présenter le système de suivi de la sécheresse dans le Grand Sud de Madagascar. Donc, voici le modèle de suivi sécheresse WRSI suivant. Voici comme plan en premier lieu le modèle WRSI en général. En second lieu, les données d'entrée, les outputs du modèle. On va faire aussi la modélisation de l'impact. Puis ensuite, les conditions de déclenchement et les fenêtres de suivi et calendrier agricole. Et enfin, l'outil de communication qui n'est que le bulletin de suivi. Suivant. Tout d'abord, il faut comprendre qu'il s'agit de la sécheresse agricole. On parle donc de sécheresse agricole qui se réfère aux besoins de la plante. Dans le cadre de notre projet, nous avons choisi le maïs et le riz comme culture de référence. Le modèle fait un suivi régulier tous les 10 jours à partir de la phase semis jusqu'à la récolte en fonction du besoin de la plante. Donc, si le modèle détecte un déficit entre cette fenêtre, il nous fera signe. Ce modèle WRSI est donc une solution d'anticiper la perte de la récolte à la fin de la saison due au déficit pluviométrique. Quand même, il y a des paramètres qu'il faut savoir, comme la date de la chimie favorable, la cycle végétatif, ainsi que le coefficient culturel. Concernant le sol, il faut savoir aussi la capacité de rétention d'eau dans le sol. Et pour les paramètres météorologiques, on aurait besoin des précipitations décadaires et les évapotranspirations. Suivant. Comme données d'entrée, nous avons les précipitations satellites et les données des stations. Donc, il faut combiner les deux pour pouvoir manipuler le modèle. Et comme output, on a les dates de semis favorables. Le modèle nous dit que c'est la date favorable pour la semis pour avoir une bonne récolte, et aussi l'estimation de la fin de saison. Donc, à droite, vous voyez comme un exemple de la situation en décembre 2023 dans le Grand Sud de Madagascar. Là, en rose, il y a le modèle là dit qu'il y a un retard du début de la saison. Et la couleur tout en vert, le modèle dit que la saison semble favorable. Et dans la partie à droite, vous pouvez voir une illustration de une perspective de ce qui pourrait être la fin de saison, une mauvaise saison ou une mauvaise récolte. Suivant. Donc, pour la modélisation de l'impact, comment donc le modèle modélise cet impact de déficit pluviométrique? Supposons donc que, que, que le maïs a besoin d'une telle quantité d'eau, soit 100% pour survivre et assurer une bonne récolte. Or, la plante n'a reçu que 60% de son besoin en eau, ce qui signifie donc que il y a un déficit de 40% et ce déficit de 40% suivant, ce déficit de 40% sera multiplié par la vulnérabilité de la communauté pour avoir l'impact de la sécheresse agricole. Voilà donc comment le modèle a modélisé et calculé l'impact de la sécheresse dans notre projet. Suivant. Nous avons donc mis en place 3 conditions de déclenchement suivant cette calendrier agricole. Donc, en premier lieu, pas de semis jusqu'à la fin du mois de janvier, c'est-à-dire que le modèle n'a trouvé aucune valeur durant la phase de semis jusqu'en janvier. Et le modèle, la sécheresse sera déclenchée par il y aura sûrement un retard de récolte au mois de mai, juin. En deuxième point, la valeur de WRSI donc, sera inférieure à 50 durant la phase de semis. Donc, si quand même la pluie est tombée durant la phase de semis, mais la valeur de WRSI sera inférieure à 50, la sécheresse sera déclenchée quand même. Et en troisième point, la valeur de WRSI sera inférieure à un seuil spécifique quelque part dans la phase. Vous voyez qu'il y a des différentes phases phénologiques de la culture. Si le WRSI est inférieur à un seuil préétabli, il y aura forcément un stress hydrique et il y aura aussi de la mauvaise récolte. Suivant. Donc, voilà un petit exemple de comment faire le suivi de la saison agricole dans le Grand Sud de Madagascar. Vous voyez, il y a deux différences. En haut, il y a la saison normale. Si la semis les conditions de semis sont remplies entre octobre à janvier, on aura une bonne récolte. Mais en bas, en rouge en bas, si la saison aura une activation, donc comme je l'ai expliqué tout à l'heure, pas de semis en janvier, la sécheresse sera déclenchée et il y aura de la mauvaise récolte en mois de juin. Si quand même la pluie il a fait de la pluie entre octobre et janvier, mais ce n'était pas suffisant pour que les conditions de semis seront remplies. Là aussi, il y aurait peut-être une perspective de mauvaise récolte au mois de juin. Et donc, nous avons 6 mois de mise en œuvre d'actions précoces à partir de cette activation quand le modèle sera activé. Suivant. Nous avons donc conçu ce bulletin de suivi sécheresse pour pouvoir communiquer, informer ou même informer ou alerter en cas de déclenchement de la sécheresse les acteurs œuvrant dans le projet d'anticipation. Cet bulletin donc été conçu pour suivre l'évolution de la sécheresse dans le Grand Sud de Madagascar. Et comme Nino a mentionné tout à l'heure, nous avons eu un déclenchement dans le sud de Madagascar. Vous voyez dans le bulletin, c'est un peu plus petit, mais il y a la couleur rouge là, la couleur rouge sur la carte. Là, le modèle dit qu'il y a un déficit pluviométrique au niveau de cette région et il y aura probablement une mauvaise récolte en fin de saison d'ici avril-mai. Donc, pour pouvoir justifier cette déficit pluviométrique, cette sécheresse qui va arriver, nous avons conçu ce bulletin pour partager avec les membres des organisations œuvrant dans l'anticipation de la sécheresse. Et je crois que j'ai terminé la présentation. Merci beaucoup pour votre aimable attention.
Merci encore une fois, Mam, pour votre présentation très pertinente. I'm just going to hold here and see if there are any questions. We do have a little bit of time left in this slot. I haven't seen any in the chat so far, but yeah, thank you very much for this presentation on the model used in Madagascar. If there are any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, I'm not seeing any hands, so I think we can move on to our next presenter. So next, I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Patias Paradzai Bongo, who is the Early Warning and Anticipatory Action Specialist for FAO in Zimbabwe. So Dr. Bongo has previously worked with START Network, building up a picture of the drought trigger models that are available in Zimbabwe. And with his current work with FAO on these models, he's expertly placed to talk with us today about the efforts being made to harmonize approaches to anticipatory action for drought in Zimbabwe. Dr. Bongo, I believe you're on the line. I'll hand over to you and let me know if you would prefer to share your screen. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Millie, and good afternoon to you all. Sorry, I did slight technical challenge and I couldn't present at the time that I was set to originally, but I'm happy now that I'm back and I've joined you. So I will start by basically giving a background to what this presentation is all about. I know we actually more or less like, focus more on the technical issues to do with the trigger development and other things. But in this case, I just wanted to share some of the experience that we've been having here in Zimbabwe in terms of attempting to institutionalize anticipatory action and early warning in the country, involving a lot of stakeholders and, including the START network, we're also playing a critical role within the whole process. So as by way of background, what we've been working on is basically activations to do with the drought, although there are some are working on floods, but what has been happening now is more work has been covering, drought activations. And a trigger for anticipatory action should be based on a set of criteria to help answer the questions when and where to act before an imminent disaster. I think this has been the critical point, the rallying point behind, anticipatory action interventions in the country. And again, it should determine when a hazard becomes out of the ordinary or a severe shock and the humanitarian impact crosses a certain threshold for the exposed vulnerable community. And we're saying that we have been using mostly seasonal focused information, but I'll also share some of the information, some of the data that we've been using as a consortium rather, or as a group of stakeholders involved in anticipatory action. But apparently, focused information requires a prior analysis of three main elements: a decision of when to act, the design of standard operating procedures of how to mobilize resources and also to act, and the monitoring of the forecasting source and action. These were three critical issues that came out of our discussions and also engagements with the government of Zimbabwe. You can move on to the next slide. Okay, so in terms of some of the models that we've been using in the country, we have the Zimbabwe flood and drought monitor by UNESCO, the Composite Drought Index by the World Bank, the Department of Civil Protection, which is a government agency in the Ministry of Local Government that is mandated to coordinate disaster risk management in the country, including anticipatory action and early warning, and also Christian Blind Mission. The third model, the drought trigger model, or the impact-based model by the Zimbabwe Red Cross Commission, Zimbabwe Red Cross Society, sorry, and also the drought trigger model by the WFP, and then the FAO probabilistic drought model, as well as the Plan International Anticipatory Action to Climate Hazards, incorporates gender-based violence and child protection. So this forms the basis of the models that are currently used in Zimbabwe. There could be others, but I think some of those agents have not yet come forward to kind of be on the table together with us as part of the Committee of Practice, which is an institution that has been formed largely composed of UN agencies, government departments, and also NGOs. And START Network has also played a critical role in the formation of this Committee of Practice, and they still do play a critical role in some of the deliberations that are going on. So I'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so in terms of how we are approaching early warning and anticipatory action in Zimbabwe, institutionally, an anticipatory action committee of practice, which I call COP, was established in 2019, and since then it was kind of not very well institutionalized. But in February 2023, they made an initiative to hold the first ever meeting in one of the towns in Zimbabwe, where the idea was to seek the guidance of the Department of Civil Protection, which I referred to earlier on, with regard to how it could contribute to disaster risk management in the country. The anticipatory action and early warning being, kind of new kids on the block, if I may call it that way, within the country, and the COP embarked on a process of engaging government to explore ways in which the COP can fit into and support already existing government DRIM structures at national and sub-national levels. And one of the critical issues in terms of institutionalization was to try to decipher how the anticipatory action could then fit into already existing, DRIM architecture within the Zimbabwe and society. And this is where, it was very critical then to make sure that the COP became a critical vehicle through which government could be engaged in advancing early warning and anticipatory action. Next slide, please. So generally, these are the members. Some may not be there, but these are the critical members that form what I would call maybe the core of the COP in Zimbabwe START Network, MSD, and the one there that resembles some kind of a cow or maybe an animal in red. That's the symbol of the Veterinary Services Department in Zimbabwe. You have K International, CBM, World Vision, START Network, WHH, UNESCO, the Civil Protection, the Meteorological Service Department, ZINWA. It's critical and also important to note that the Zimbabwe National Water Authority, Civil Protection, Agritex, MSD, and SEDIC are part of the government of Zimbabwe institutions that are also part of this community of practice, as well as universities, particularly Bindira University of Science, Education, and Manuela University of Agricultural Science and Technology. So these are actually constitute the membership of the Anticipatory Action Committee of Practice in Zimbabwe. Next slide, please. So in terms of what has been happening so far on the ground, IFRC, FAO, and WFP are jointly implementing an eco-funded project titled Building Capacity in Southern Africa to Enable Effective Disaster Risk Management through Regional Systems for Interagency and Anticipatory Action using a multi-hazard approach, multi-sector approach as well. So this project aims at consolidating and harmonizing progress made in Zimbabwe in order to move from siloed AA mechanisms for cyclones, floods, and drought towards national interagency AA frameworks that also allow for holistic management of multi-hazard disaster risk. So by way of a timeline, in September last year, we conducted our first National Anticipatory Action Review Retreat. This was a critical workshop in the sense that it enabled the COP and government of Zimbabwe to find each other, because initially there had been some issues to do with ownership of anticipatory action initiatives. In other words, there were sentiments to the fact that maybe it was kind of seen as a parallel structure to the already existing structures. So there was need to then engage government to ensure that we are on the same footing. And fortunately, that actually, yielded very good results. We had very good results coming out of this retreat. Government then, got to understand where we're coming from, and with the support of the departments there, they've actually since taken over and are now running forward with the early warning anticipatory action initiative. So from that retreat, we moved on to the multi-partner national stakeholder workshop, which was in October, where as stakeholders, we actually came up with the draft national anticipatory action roadmap for the country, where we're trying to harmonize, a number of AA initiatives happening in the country, and not necessarily having one kind of, approach, but we're seeing all those approaches that are there. How do we make sure that we have a common vision and a common goal? We avoid duplication of effort, resources, and also time, and also we foster exchange of experiences and also information and results. And then that was followed by a stakeholder roadmap validation workshop in December 2023. So the roadmap that was developed in October was then validated in a workshop in December. And now as the as the coordinator of that particular process, I'm now in the process of tying together some of the sections so that I can finally circulate the document for just final review before it can be officially published. And I'm sure our colleagues from START will also get a copy because they're also part of this initiative. Next slide. So I had gone ahead of this presentation, but anyway, it was held over 2 days in September as a diagnostic space. I'm talking about the review retreat and platform to take stock of AA initiatives in Zimbabwe with a view to setting the stage for development of a harmonized approach that falls within the overall mandate of the government of Zimbabwe, DRM architecture. And it also provided a platform for sought dialogue between government of Zimbabwe, COP, and other players. Because there were a lot of issues to do with implementation of anticipatory action, interventions in the country. So that workshop provided a critical platform for that, for a SWOT analysis. And one of the issues also that came out clearly, and this has resonated throughout the the succeeding workshops, is the use of one trigger. We cannot use one trigger model. That is not scientifically sound. And this came out clearly from some of the interactions that we're having. We should work on a number of the currently available models, like the ones that I've already highlighted earlier on, to test these trigger models for at least 3 to 4 seasons so that we can be able to tell how they perform. So in implementing AA, we also realized that the critical issues to consider are our internal systems as implementers, as NGOs, as UN agencies, and also as government departments. Are they ready? Our systems ready and processes, are they ready? Are they responsive to the needs and requirements of AA? For example, speed in terms of procurement, deployment, flexibility, and also pre-positioning, and also the readiness phase, because there were a number of issues that were coming out as a result of maybe failure to synchronize some of the activities, particularly taking a lot of time during the readiness phase. And also to integrate anticipatory action, all government and DRM structures from national through local level must have AA subcommittees. This was a critical outcome that came from the review retreat. Government then took ownership of this, and they said to cement this, to strengthen this, they were now going to establish anticipatory action structures from national to local level with AA subcommittees. So in other words, if you look at the DRM architecture in Zimbabwe, we have structures from national to provincial and district level. So within those DRM structures, there will be anticipatory action subcommittees that will be feeding into the wider DRM structure. So this is something that has been a big victory for the AA community in the country. And there's also a need to fit in AA within contingency planning. These were the outcomes of the review retreat. Next slide. And then in terms of the multi-partner national workshop, the one that was held in October as a follow-up to the AA review retreat, basically we developed a national anticipatory action roadmap, which I've already alluded to. We also identified roles and responsibilities that stakeholders could take in committing to actually finalizing the roadmap, and also facilitating multi-partner discussions on anticipatory action, including mapping who's doing what, where, when, and why. What we'd call originally the 3 Ws, but I think it's now the 5 Ws. The Ws keep increasing. I'm sure we'll get up to 6, 7 Ws. Anyway, so what were the main outputs of this workshop? It was basically, the first one was the development of the national roadmap, and also participation of communities through traditional leaders taking lead roles in anticipatory action, although they need more capacity. And I will speak to this later on, because we are now following up from the findings and also the deliberations and also resolutions that came out of this workshop. I keep referring to the ECO Joint Project. Well, it's just the funder of this initiative, but this is a national initiative that is involving a lot of stakeholders. Only that ECO is funding the joint project. Okay, next slide. And then in terms of the trigger models triangulation roadmap review workshop, in December we conducted a trigger models triangulation workshop, the first one in a series that we're planning to hold in the country. The main objectives being to identify the various trigger models that have been developed, and those are the ones I highlighted earlier on, and to identify justification of the various indicators using these models, which basically are composed of a number of classes of indicators, but mainly long-range focus indicators, seasonal observation focus indicators, and as well as vulnerability indicators. So mainly those three classes of indicators have been featured in these models. And then formulation of recommendations on how to improve on the efficacy of the trigger models and the validation of the project roadmap. So what were the main outputs or outcomes of this triangulation workshop? First one had to do with interrogating the trigger model indicators. How scientifically sound are they? How do you strengthen their scientific soundness? And what are our sources of data? To what extent do we have control over these models? Because in most cases, some of these models are developed from out of Zimbabwe by our technical experts. Like, for example, the FAO model, where I am, was developed by technical experts. And when we want to make modifications, for example, to the model, we need to really go back to the technical experts and see how best we can actually do that modification. So at the end of the day, we're saying, how then do we ensure that we also play a bigger role in the trigger model indicators, and also in determining them? Are they cast in stone? What about indigenous early warning indicators as also contribute towards the final classification of the indicators that we're using? And also in the terms of the testing of the models, in terms of the efficacy and usefulness of models and their parameters, we need to base that on verification results in terms of hits and misses, and also to make adjustments in the model, going back again to the model and work on equations and also parameters, and how to share data, feedback, information on the models, and also the role of government, that is DCP, in terms of this whole outcome, in terms of this whole project of triangulation of these models. Next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of the current, I think this is my last slide. In terms of the current state and going forward, what are we saying? We're talking about the finalization of the publication of the roadmap, which I said earlier on, and also finalization of the TORs for the anticipatory action subcommittees, a task which has been actually, kind of apportioned to the committee of practice, and the capacity building of AA subcommittees in the AA and or FBF. I think I'm saying and or because there's been a controversy about whether AA is the same with focus-based financing or whatever. Where do you draw the line? So I'm just accommodating that for the sake of those who want to be very, very particular about terminology. So in terms of capacity building of the AA subcommittees, the COP is actually working on a plan that is going to be financed by FAO and WFP to embark on a nationwide exercise to train subcommittees on anticipatory action, and also in establishing the national AA hub, where our colleague from the START network, Dr. Tapiwa Mzerengi, has been given the lead role to actually move forward with this in terms of establishing the national anticipatory action hub, and also to conduct another national AA retreat. Very critical is the performance of current activations. We need to document project results and experiences. For example, right now, I can talk about current activations going on where FAO, WFP, the Zimbabwe Red Cross Society, and also START network are actually preparing to activate projects on drought, on the El Nino drought anticipatory actions, and also COP to present at AA to present on anticipatory action at the National Civil Protection Committee meetings, as well as following up on the trigger models triangulation workshop. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is just a photo collage showing some of the taken from some of the key activities or initiatives. And at the top left-hand corner there, our colleague from START Network facilitating the the triangulation model, the model triangulation workshop in Bulawayo. And then top right, there's the MSD guy making a presentation during the area review retreat. And then the middle there is the DRR day, where the COP was also invited to participate. And then at the left bottom, that's the Committee of Practice colleagues from Zimbabwe Red Cross Society, WFP, presenting on AA for the first time during the National Contingency Planning Workshop. And also on the bottom right, one of the community radio stations making a presentation at the inception meeting for one of the drought activation projects. So in a nutshell, I would say this is where my presentation ends. Thank you for your attention. Over to you, Millie.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bongo, for struggling through with those technical difficulties to bring us this insightful presentation on everything that's happening in Zimbabwe around anticipating drought. I think there's some interesting challenges in there for all of us around how we triangulate these models and different things we can take into account. And yeah, it's really fantastic to see the level of collaboration and coordination that's happening in Zimbabwe. So thank you very much. I will hold on just for a couple of questions. I think, David, I can see your hand up, and I encourage others to please share in the chat and raise your hand if you have anything you'd like to ask. David, over to you for now.
Thanks, Millie, and thanks to Dr. Bongo for the interesting presentation. I wanted to ask about the model triangulation. Like, how has that process gone so far? And what do you think is a good objective? What is a good goal from that? Is it to finally agree on one common model that everyone would use, or just align them enough so you have common like thresholds, or maybe different regions where people are covering? Like, what is the ultimate aim of that? And yeah, just generally, how's it going? Because I guess people probably invested a lot in their model development. Thanks.
Okay, I'll take that question. So in terms of the triangulation, the major idea here, or the major aim, is actually to have some common thresholds that agencies can draw from. I know we're discussing the issue of having one common model, but like you talked about the investment and also the different contexts that agencies operate in. Because yes, you may be talking about models in Zimbabwe, but if you look at the way the country is actually structured, I mean, I would say naturally, we're into around 4 or 5 natural regions, agroecological regions, where you basically have different parameters and also different indicators that you can actually use to then monitor or to in terms of forecasting what is happening in terms of the weather within these different contexts. So maybe coming up with a one common model may be problematic, may be difficult, but we're talking about, we agree on maybe common thresholds from where we can then, whose performance we can then be sharing, I mean, whose performance we can then be sharing information on, and also experience, so that we can then work together and assist each other in terms of how to improve on those models. Because what is critical, yes, we have developed the models, the scientific issues are very, very, they're nicely done, but at the end of the day, how does that translate into tangible risk reduction and anticipatory actions for the at-risk communities? So that is the critical issue at the present moment. Maybe in future there could be a common model, but for now that has not been the objective. And people are talking about harmonization and triangulation. So that has been a critical debate. Are we harmonizing? Are we triangulating? So we felt that let's start by triangulating, and then later on we see what happens, and then we can say, are we harmonizing the models, or we're basically looking at common thresholds? So that's a very good question. It has been asked quite a number of times, and I'm sure, yeah, it makes a lot of sense, yeah, to really probe into that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, a real interesting conversation there on what's the most useful outcome between the triangulation and the harmonization. And I see David's thanked you in the chat as well. I think we're probably in time now to move on to our next speaker. So thank you again, Dr. Bongo, for joining us. Really appreciate it. And if you could stay on the line, hopefully we will have a bit more discussion later on. But for now, I'm just going to share the screen again. Sorry, one moment. So for now, we'll be moving on. So next, I'm passing the baton on to Francisco Osuna, who I believe is just back to Bogota from visiting a project site. So thank you very much for joining us, and is currently in the midst of implementing another Start Fund alert in anticipation of drought. So Francisco is the humanitarian program manager for Latin America and the Caribbean with HelpAge International, and was very involved in the process of applying for and implementing the analysis for action grants, and also the that led to the alert 733, but also the subsequent projects. So today, Francisco will talk us through some of the data used to support these applications, as well as some of the learning from implementation of the alert. So Francisco, thank you again for joining us today. Thank you for joining us so early in the morning. And over to you for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Millie. Oh, presentation is already there. Better. Let's just say greetings to all colleagues in this meeting. It's an honor and a pleasure to share this experience, which is not mine or even HelpAge's alone. This is a teamwork, a continued teamwork done by several members of the Start Fund network. You will see the names in the presentation, but also the significant contribution from local partners. So to provide some quick context, we are talking about La Guajira, the north corner of Colombia, next to the Caribbean Sea, which has several particular features. One is that the most extensive part of the area is basically desertic climate without available sources of running water like rivers or lakes. There's only one river, but does not cover the whole region. So the second situation is that this is the land inhabited since before the colony of the Americas. I am saying before 15th century by the Wayu indigenous people. A nation that has particular customs, own language, proper own rules, and a very different kind of culture for the one we apply in the, let's say, Western world or developed world. So to start, why did we raise Start Fund Crisis Alert? Basically, we have been 7, 8, 9 or more working together. Let me mention and thank to Cadena, to World Vision, to Goal, to Save the Children, World Jewish Relief, Humanitarian Inclusion, and our local partners, Pastoral Social from Rio Hacha, and Convite from Venezuela and Colombia. So why did we raise an alert initially? We raised one to respond to an emergency situation. A bit more than 2 years ago, Hurricane Julia hit the region named High Guajira, comprised by 4 municipalities, Manaure, Rio Hacha, Maicao, and Uribia, and turned the desert into mud. And then we learned the situation of lack of safe water was exactly the same in dry time than what it is in the rainy season, although they no longer exist as such because climate change has changed everything. No, can we go to the former one just for a second? Thank you, Millie. So basically, what you communities drink water as one and use it once to me from wherever they can. Their most common source is reservoirs they call Hawaii's that dry quickly during the drought season. Um, by the time we raised the first alert, the Guajira was not drought, was flooded. Mud, a desert tending to mud, no communication, even via land, very difficult. So we responded. We responded with an alert in which we identified that most important need was safe water, and there were several communities at risk. So we asked for an adjustment and modification of that emergency to be able to start rehabilitating infrastructure, as many Wayu communities have also maybe windmills or deep water wells that are damaged due to the lack of maintenance and the lack of funding to do so from their part. They are actually one of the most vulnerable communities in Colombia, and they count up to maybe 7,100 individuals. Now, what happened next? A question came to all of us, which is why are we always, all of us means this group of Star Network members and local partners. So we started asking ourselves. I actually remember the question was raised by Natasha Leff from Cadena, asking us all, hey, why are we always responding in the same manner to a cyclic situation? We shouldn't try to change this. So that's where our search started. And because we learned we could quickly adjust, repair, and maintain infrastructure that was not operational, that we could do that by optimizing resources available in short time periods, and that besides of that we could strengthen community work to try to build proper water communities around the infrastructure for trying to build sustainability. Then we said, well, this is the moment to try to change the way we think about this. So now we can go to the next one, please. And for the first time, we started talking about anticipation. So the first thing was talking to the Star Fund and tell them we need to anticipate next crisis. We know is coming. The name is El Nino. All forecasting shows it will be the hardest, since we have data which is more than 100 years. Effects can be by far the largest up to now in terms of risk of life. So we need to anticipate, and we prepared with some accompaniment from Star Fund. Thanks a lot to Ed Parkinson, not here today. So he guided us to ask for a first small anticipation grant, which was crucial because we had the funding to plan, gather the information we needed, and really build sort of a process in which we could use emergency response resources to provide a quick response, but also in with a lens of sustainability and kind of living capacity installed to avoid future lack of safe water. Next one, please. Thank you. Just at a glance, 87% of so we gather data. This is primary data gathered from ourselves in an extensive RNA exercise done together by us all. So because we are several, we could cover many areas and communities and gather good data. So the result is we found 87% of the households in the Wayu communities in the High Guajira, these 4 municipalities I have talked about, do not have safe water. That's it. Secondly, that also relates to high levels of food insecurity, especially for children, older people, and people with disabilities. And third, the lack of income or economic activities for livelihoods, because climate change has turned things around upside down. There are no periods of months that were before between rains and droughts. So there are not what we call seasons, which are only 2 in the year. So Wayus cannot anymore conduct their traditional agriculture activities. Therefore, we have been witnessing a continuous impoverishment and basically kind of the increase of high levels of risks for these communities. Next one, please. So this is anticipatory process for us. First, have primary data from the sources, good data analyzed. And we are not talking about needs only, we are talking about needs, vulnerabilities, but also market conditions, providers, technical solutions, timelines, coordination with other key stakeholders required. All that can be anticipated, and that was the kind for us the miracle the anticipation tool gave to us. We were able to finally come up with sort of an integral, comprehensive seed rep that already considered everything. So we were ready to act, which is our name for these emergencies. Then the second thing is that we believe that in different manners, that's another discussion. These agencies working as a whole, we have permanent presence, local presence in territories. Therefore, we are not strangers. So we believe that localization is kind of one of the keys for this kind of anticipation responses. Then capacity. If we add to all these technology and quick and serious programmatic and technical and finance management, we will have a result. As I will show later, right now, I think our average time in rehabilitating a system for a community of between 200 and 400 people is 7 days. And finally, sustainability. Our final goal is to be able to leave in some time this management to the water committees and build indigenous local partner organizations able to receive funding from the Colombian government for monitoring, reparations, and maintenance. That's the final goal, and we think we can achieve that within the next year for reasons I will tell later. Next one, please. So, as told, this is a process. This is not one alert. And in this, I would like to emphasize the fact that always we check these box, at least as in the alerts template and the proposals template, we are always asked, do you foresee any other source of funding for this? Where? Here, what has happened is that by getting started with start fund resources, we have been able to show the result and then get more funding from donors, being the main one, the start fund. So I would say that at this point in time, we started with the anticipation alert 651. Then we did the first intervention by November, December last year. Then we got extra funding from an American private donor. Then we got our first 4 communities repaired with that 733 alert I am talking about right now. Then we got more private funding. Then because of the unbelievable raise of risk, we now are implementing another Star Fund anticipation project that includes 2 more communities. For the first time, now we are transferring this technology knowledge to another ethnic group, which is the Kogi community in Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. So what I want to report as a result, as an outcome up to now, is that we started with 140K pounds by, no, less than that the first time. But for anticipation, we started with 140K pounds some months ago by November, December last year, with 4 communities that we were lucky to find additional funding from the MACP Foundation, but also from Cadena's internal resources, and completed the first 4. And with these first 4, then we were able to work with 4 more, and with it extra money, 1 more, and now 2 more. So this is kind of a chain. An anticipation chain starts to be built. And at this point, we have completed or are about to complete 10 indigenous communities with safe water, according to SFER standards, with proper distribution and wash training, and water communities operational from themselves under their own traditions, culture, and language. And actually, this information is wrong because we need to add the part that is now going to be added in terms of beneficiaries from the last 2, Tungeka and Oroko, you see there. So to this number of 5,750 persons served, we can add now 1,700 more. Next one, please. So first lesson learned, we work together. You can see the picture. There's all of us, in our names there, and always the Star Fund network first. How do we work together? We work in a full coordinator manner. We meet since the beginning to build the alert and the proposal. Everyone participates. We decide together who's going to lead. Sometimes it's us, sometimes it's Cadena, sometimes it's Gold. It doesn't matter. We all are partners, but we work together. We raise the same data with the same methodology. We do the same analysis. We prioritize in a similar manner. We gather all information, and then to optimize cost, we also quote and work together in deciding what the providers are going to be. We have a common timeline, so we meet results kind of in a planned manner to try to avoid kind of halts or overloads of work for any of us. So we follow the working plan, but it's a gathered, a team working plan, no a one partner or one organization plan. Then we coordinate with the government and authorities and indigenous communities together. We don't do that alone. And for that, we have found very useful to have only one project coordinator in the field for all of us that will kind of be the link between us all. The result is trust and results for communities, and a lot of efficiency for us. Next one, please. Thanks a lot. So the simple message that I think we would like to deliver here is when we talk about anticipatory processes and alerts and proposals and grants, in the end, what we are talking about is about saving lives. We are really saving lives. We are now gathering data ex post PDM. And frankly, what I can tell for now, until we have results like formal indicators processed, there's a significant diminish in illness for children, women, and older people, mostly in these communities, now counting on safe water systems. Second, we have learned that we can use rapid response funds quickly to try to find longer term lasting solutions. So these 10 communities we expect will not suffer, are not suffering now. 8 out of 10 have water and we are in a drought. But in the future, they will also have, when there's a flood or when El Nino comes back, they will have water no matter what. And we also think that maybe it's about time. We know the core emergency funding mission is to solve immediate needs and key assistance for saving lives and country rate risks. But we are, at least us, we are learning to think in this context in a nexus perspective, like what's next, which is something the Star Fund always asks to us, what's next? Next one, please. So for us, what is next is to significantly reduce humanitarian crisis being there for 50 years or more in La Guajira, securing additional funding sources for sustainable, safe water for all indigenous communities. Once we have water, our next step is to try to innovate in the recovery of traditional or alternative, also livelihoods, based on water availability. We are moving towards that direction with other donors. And basically, if we reduce the gap on water and food, we will quickly see a change in terms of illness, chronic illness, severe malnutrition, which currently is most likely level 5, that we all know takes consequences, and less children dying. La Guajira has 3 times the average of children deaths rate than the rest of the countries, the highest one in the country. Far from any other indicator in Colombia, maybe the only closest one could be Chocó and Vichada, other prioritized areas in the HRP. So for sustainability, and then I can present good news today to finish. That's why we have been coordinating with the Colombian government to find ways to make this last. So I can announce today that our local partner, CEPAS Rio Hacha, our partner World Vision, and our partner Cadena have received direct contracts to be signed in an amount close to $5 million. That happened yesterday. So I am very happy and proud to announce this, to lead on rehabilitating infrastructures, in infrastructure for 90 more Wayuu communities, which is an exponential growth. and building together sustainability via strong indigenous local partners with growing capacities. That to me is the final result in terms of outcome of an initial anticipation alert. So it's amazing what can happen after. Many thanks to the Star Fund. They always support our purposes and ideas. Many thanks to all our team of INGOs and local partners, because we have built trust together and we have learned that we are different, but we can complement each other's mission and work together. Our final goal is autonomy and independence for indigenous communities. That's what the Constitution of Colombia says, and that's what, in the end, our purpose is. Just to close, I would like to ask you to provide an extra minute to see a little clip also available. Thank you very much, Millie and Caroline. I think that's all from my part.
Thank you so much, Francisco. I'll just play the video now.
Takoy patamaiva, Maria staya. No taya ya hati, antos taya muy. Maria intaya. Antos teso no tuoi. Ala cuarta sahi boy. O uno tachaya, achaha chico wencha santo interesa gakarati. Achaha katu wenka. Maria kataya.
Después de 12 años nosotros dejamos de buscar agua en caneca, en burro, 3 kilómetros de aquí, diario, con el sol, madrugando. Llegó la reactivación del microacueducto. Gracias a Dios es un hecho.
Desde octubre del 2022, con las comunidades de Mapachirra, Ichichón, La Paz, Santa Clara, Uluguaypa, Isachimana y Alushirra en la Guajira colombiana, hemos reparado y rehabilitamos sus sistemas de abastecimiento que ahora proveen agua segura, el bien más escaso. Consolidamos los comités comunitarios del manejo del agua para lograr la sostenibilidad y el abastecimiento a más de 5.000 personas. Gracias a los donantes internacionales por su apoyo, en La Guajira continuamos trabajando en equipo. El fortalecimiento comunitario es la respuesta.
Muchas gracias.
Okay, many thanks.
Thank you so much, Francisco, for painting us such a vivid picture of the fantastic work that you've been doing, you and everybody in Colombia, working to move from that initial analysis for action grant all the way through to this incredible sustainable work. And congratulations to all of you for the excellent news that you just shared with us. I can see that there are some questions in the chat. I think they are related to more sort of general, wider questions. So before I move on to those, I just wanted to check whether anyone has specific questions relating to Francisco's excellent presentation we just saw. So I'll hold for one moment and see if anybody would like to raise their hand with any questions. Okay, I think, yeah, it was clearly very comprehensive. I managed to answer all of the questions in advance. So thank you so much, Francisco. Israel, I can see that there is a question from you in the chat. I wonder if you would like to come off mute to ask your question. Otherwise, it might be complicated with the interpretation. So the question is around. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oui, en fait, je suis Israël Chibangushima dans République démocratique du Congo. Ma question, ça prend juste l'axe très global, celle de savoir si il y a une différence, non, pas différence, je voudrais savoir plutôt si l'anticipation, elle est primordiale que la prévention par rapport à tout ce que je viens de visualiser, parce que étant visiteur, je n'ai jamais été dans la plateforme et je voudrais un peu savoir plus parce que si on voyait le seuil du niveau de vulnérabilité dans certaines zones que je sais bien de catégoriser zones rurales, périurbaines et aussi urbaines. Donc, essayez de me préciser un peu si par rapport à ces natures d'intervention, on pourra avoir une idée par rapport à l'anticipation et aussi la prévention. Merci beaucoup.
Merci Israel, c'est une question très pertinente. I think, Nelly, you've written a message into the chat in response. Maybe if I just quickly add before I hand over to you, I think, I mean, at least from Start Network's perspective, for sure, I think we would all agree that prevention is definitely a better endpoint to be working towards. But while we're trying to get to that endpoint of prevention and preparedness, we are really trying to build anticipation into a wider spectrum of disaster risk management. I think it all needs to work together as a comprehensive system, and then eventually we'll hopefully reach a point where prevention is the norm. Anticipation can be used for those bigger events that are kind of outside of what's ongoing. And then we have response for the unpredictable and the unforecastable. I think it always needs to work as a spectrum and as a full management system in that way. And meanwhile, I think it's, Francisco, what you were presenting is that kind of sustainable intervention. I think it's essential that while we're working towards reaching that point, all of our anticipatory action, there's interventions that include activities that are sustainable and that kind of do strengthen preparedness in the way that Francisco was mentioning. I'd like to open this question though, because I think probably there's a lot of thoughts. So Francisco, I don't know if you would like to come in, and then Nelly.
Maybe perhaps can I add something? Hi, Israel. Nice to meet you. No, I would just like to say that in this case we were able to act because we were there, because we know the area, because there's data, because of many things, but you can't always anticipate everything. So this is just to say two things. Anticipation will never replace, as you just said, Millie, will never replace the need for response to immediate, sudden, unpredictable crisis. That was our experience when all this started. All this started with a shocking, unpredicted change in the direction of a hurricane hitting the place that was not gonna hit, and it hit hard. So that's where the whole story started. The second thing I want to say is that from us, in our own reflection, as told, now we are 10, so we kind of act as 10, but as one together. Our next question, thrown by several guys from the team, is how to anticipate better. We really think that even in Colombia, we have good meteorological tools. That does not happen in other countries. Let's say for the context, I know which is Latin America and the Caribbean, we don't have the same in Venezuela or in Haiti or other parts. So we really need to start trying to build sort of complementary tools to anticipate risk and disasters coming. That's from us, I think, our next reflection and probably our next step. I think, I don't know. I know there's a lot of people from the team we have in LAC of many organizations being part of this. I don't I don't really know if they want to throw in some other ideas. Sorry that I am kind of not very diplomatic in talking, but I think it's age. With age, you just talk about, I don't know, concrete things. Sorry, and thank you.
Thank you, Francis.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much.
Nelly, I wonder if you would like to come in as well. I can see you've added a message to the chat.
No, I think it's been covered. It was just to say that I think you've pretty much covered, Millie and also Francisca. It's just to say that I think in humanitarian there is no one response that is a panacea. It's really around the layered approach. It's around the context. It's around how the crisis is unfolding. So really, it's about that layered. And I think as you was presenting, we were actually also reflecting like, in START networks, sometimes it starts with members in country really making use of the START funds, which are flexible funds for small to medium scale small crises that is unpredictable or predictable. But we sometimes then move on to really develop fully fledged system because maybe we think for a certain hazard the scale is just too large. We can move on to build much more concrete systems and even layer other windows in terms of a response, where, for example, we can intervene for drought with anticipatory action and move on to a layer for early actions soon after that window, where we can actually intervene before the crisis unfolds. And then once it unfolds again, we have another layer. It's unfortunate there was a presentation, I think that now has been phased out. We're going to go so demonstrating what we're doing with another mechanism where we then kick in, where anticipatory actions end, we have funding ready to go in with early response. Thank you.
Oh, very interesting, Nelly. Can I add something?
Sure.
From what you just said, my own personal reflection is that anticipatory action does not occur online or remotely. You need to be there. So as you just said, to me the first requirement requirement is that in humanitarian we need to always be there. Is a call for localization. We don't know everything. We are not in every place. In most of places we are foreigners. We need to rely on local communities, local knowledge, local authorities, local stakeholders if we really want to anticipate. They are the ones who know.
Thanks so much, Francisco. I think that actually links really nicely to a question in the chat around the water system of groundwater and whether there is any use of indigenous technology, whether that was a feature in your intervention. So I do have David who can talk a little bit about ARC, which Nelly just mentioned in a moment. But yeah, Pramila, I don't know if you want to ask your question, if you're there and able to come off mute.
Thank you, Millie. Actually, this is interesting for us as well. So I'm just wondering, because just seeing the picture, I'm not understanding whether they are using groundwater system or any other surface water system. So what kind of systems are you using on that? And is there any indigenous, because you are working in the indigenous people area, it seems like, so are you using any indigenous technology that can be adopted in this process? This is my questions.
It's a great one. We also have, I don't know, David, you want to go ahead? No? Okay, so Pramilia, nice to meet you. Hi. Thoughtful, hard question. Actually, why you people do not have technology for water reservoirs or water management, which is the main problem. Diseases do not only come due to the lack of water, but also because of the fact that water from reservoirs, they call haways, they basically will dig a big hole in some part to keep rainwater stored there in any conditions. But that due to customs, one of the most appreciated assets for Wayuus are goat. Wayu is a goat culture. So goats have also the right to access water. So goats eat and live, and of course do their own things for excrements and all that, aside the Hawaii. So you will find that we are always talking about water that is contaminated by several bacteria, but being there without any movement, lacking oxygen. So being very, very, very contaminated water that they still will drink and use for daily living. So in this case, our own challenge is how to adapt suitable technology, I mean, to the climate conditions of the desert in La Guajira, to indigenous customs and culture. That's what we are trying to do. So our systems there are basically two kinds of systems. We operate via water windmills to which we add filters and, if needed, reverse osmosis membranes, because water coming from underground in the Guajira is heavy water. It has metals. It is salty, so you need to treat it to make it become safe. Or deep water wells with a deep immersion pump, from which we will bring water to the soil level and then treat it. Those are the answers we have for now, but the real answer is how to inscribe this into the Wayu context. So that's why we are building Wayu water communities that in the future we intend to be turned into proper indigenous organizations according to their own regulations and traditions. That's the next step. However, I can tell you this: we will know about more about this in 2 months, because for the first time, as told before, we are providing a water system for a different indigenous ethnic group in the same region, which is a Kogi. They live in the Holy Mountains, considered by several of us of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. So in this case, Kogi communities do not allow any kind of technology to be added to water. It's a whole different intervention in which we are building a new micro aqueduct according to their customs, but I cannot report on that yet because it's not finished. Once we finish and learn, I think in 2 or 3 months we will be able to, from facts, tell what we learned. Thanks a lot. That's all I can say for now, I guess.
Thank you, Francisco. We'll have to invite you back in a couple of months' time to share the findings from that. Let us know how it goes. Thank you very much. Yeah, we have a couple of minutes left. I just wanted to maybe touch quickly on the comment from Nelly before around the risk layering approach. So looking more at a macro scale. So David, I wonder if you could just say a couple of words, please, around Start Network's relationship with ARC and some of the work that we've been doing there. Over to you. Thanks.
Sure, thanks, Millie. Maybe useful to just sort of go back a few steps to what we were discussing before and Israel's point. So obviously we hope that there's a lot of ongoing programming to address like reducing longer term risk of the impacts of drought and potentially food insecurity. But if there is an early warning, what can be done? So there's a lot of work going on, as we heard specifically in Zimbabwe, about looking at different forecast models, taking anticipatory actions, supporting people to mitigate crop loss and potentially then mitigate food insecurity. We heard from Madagascar about that model that can monitor like through the beginning of the sowing window, and if there's a increased risk due to very bad sowing period, they could potentially act and rapidly intervene there to once again try and anticipate what's going to happen due to more crop losses. But I think exactly as Nelly was saying, those interventions, if possible, will probably be quite small scale. They will not reach everybody. I think they're traditionally, as we're all finding, not the easiest to fundraise for, especially that a very initial stage. So there's going to be a point where a response is required, most probably. Humanitarian impact is coming. At the end of the season, we will be able to say whether that season has performed very badly. And therefore, we have been engaged since about 2018 at Start Network in the ARC Replica program, almost entirely on drought policies until last year when we took the first cyclone policy in Madagascar. But ideally, it's a disaster risk financing instrument, really, and it's a macro insurance policy that has a pre-agreed threshold. So if you reach a drought at the end of a season, at the end of a harvest period of a certain severity, there would be a payout. And depending on how bad the drought event was, and therefore how bad the food insecurity could be, you would get a different level of payout. So again, I think we're seeing it as another instrument that can fit that small window there where we've passed the time when anticipation is possible and going to be affected, and the crop loss has happened. The food security is coming, and we're waiting for the kind of big traditional food security responses to kick in and all of that fundraising to happen. But so we have this sort of small window here where we have preset thresholds, we have predetermined amounts of funding, and hopefully we can move quickly to meet that gap and meet that need before the kind of longer term, bigger interventions come in. I think, you know, we could say a couple of examples. So there was, probably many people have heard about it, a substantial payout for Senegal in 2019-20 of about $10.5 million to Start Network, and about 12 million went to the government. And in our first policy in Somalia, there was a about $3.5 million complemented with some other funding, about $4 million payout there. We're looking at forecasts showing potential likelihood of payouts in Zimbabwe this year in May time. I think we're at time, but yeah, nice to see everyone. Thanks a lot, Minnie.
Thanks so much, David. Yes, we are just about at time, but thank you for giving a quick outline there of ARC and our work with ARC Replica. Just before I wrap up, I'd just really like to say thank you again to all of the fantastic speakers that we've had. I think a few of them have had to drop off the line now, but yeah, I can see Dr. Bongo, you're still here, Nelly as well for opening remarks. Mami, thank you so much for presenting that model from Madagascar. It's really, really fantastic to hear from so many different contexts and so many different places where we're all trying to work towards the same end result. Before I end the call, I'd just like to ask if everyone who's able to could pop their camera on, and we could just take a photo to share with the notes of everyone's faces who stayed with us right to the end. So thank you to you for joining the call, for listening in, sharing your opinions and your questions, and engaging with us. It's always fantastic to have such a great group. Hopefully someone's able to quickly screen grab that. Fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody. And that's it for today. Just a couple of minutes over. There was plenty more to say, I think, but we'll be in touch with the notes, and feel free to contact us with any questions you might have. Thank you all. Bye.